Hello and welcome to this video on one of the more controversial practices around pharmacology, and particularly pharmaceutical companies and drug profiteering. Evergreening is an umbrella term for a group of practices that extend the lifetime of the legal protections of a patent. This is a situation that often skirts the line of being illegal. It nearly always exists in the grey area of law the rest of the time. Evergreening, or as it is also known, follow-on innovation, often applies to the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, it's almost exclusively the pharmaceutical industry. The bigger corporations rely on a variety of tools to achieve the prolonged protections of their patented products after the original patent has expired. These can focus on including other uses, delivery systems, and even how it's packaged, all modifications of the original drug. This reduces competition from other manufacturers who could be producing a generic option of this drug. This may also be used by manufacturers of a particular drug to prevent competition from these other manufacturers who would like to bring a generic to market. This all comes from the fact that a novel drug may take 20 years from patent acceptance to patent expiry. Bringing the drug to market can take 10 to 15 of those years. This leaves a finite window of time to recover the R&D costs and derive a profit. As much as 75% of new drug applications by generic manufacturers have been met with a legal contestant. This means one of the original manufacturers of the drugs have taken them to court, claiming it infringes their patent rights under some context. It's nearly always the original brand manufacturer that does this, rather than a newer developer and incorporator of the drug. This means you can often find there are several layers of people willing to fight a new person coming into the market. This has led to some of the drugs, particularly in the United States of America, having their cost increased. This is because the generic version, which should be cheaper, is not able to come onto the market, thereby driving competition and the price down. That's one of the key points behind the patent systems that are being abused in this case. They are meant to be used within the free market economic system. That means more people making more versions of the same drug drives prices down in an effort to capture more of the finite market by selling it at a reduced price. Evergreening is done by something called linkage, and that is where a pharmaceutical product will have to have its safety, quality, and efficacy compared to the normal product that was established and made by the original manufacturer. The original manufacturers are often able to get away with impeding this progress, mostly by claiming that the generic product is an infringement of a current and existing patent. For example, if you were to take aspirin, and to make aspirin more effective, you were to, at the end of its original patent lifetime, add caffeine to make it more absorbent. You could then go to a new manufacturer and say, yes, but they brought out a generic product and it has the same chemical in there. Therefore, even though our original generic product, the aspirin, is no longer protected, this new formulation is. This inevitably creates an environment where innovation is less important than improvement and alteration of existing products. Competition can be stifled due to the difficulty in bringing a generic product to bear. The lack of innovation and generic options adversely affects the public health by making it harder for the public to get cheaper medication. An extremely compelling and useful example of this is Venlafaxine. You'll often see it marketed as Effexor. The original Effexor had a series of major side effects, but these were not able to be overcome. Modifying the formula did do this, and it was done by making it an extended release formulation. That drastically altered the side effects and made it far more easily handled. As a result of this new formulation, the company that made it was given 2 new patents. These were for the extended release versions. Now, the Effexor itself isn't the primary active ingredient. In fact, it needs to be put through the liver and converted through metabolism. When it is converted, it is turned into Venlafaxine. That is the active ingredient as such, and it is the original active ingredient. That drug is sold under the brand name of Prestige. You can tell from the fact that metabolism can process it and convert it, the two should be a related product, and that is true. One is almost a direct product of the other one. However, FXOR, whether as the original product or the extended release, fundamentally has the same effect as the new modified version, which is the one that doesn't require first-pass metabolism. The new modified one, called Venlafaxine, is sold under the brand name of Prestige. FXOR, FXOR extended release, and Prestige have no different benefits for patients, ultimately. Now, the side effects between the FXOR and the FXOR extended release are arguable, but between FXOR extended release and Prestige, you will find that there is no arguable case to be made as to how they are different. Despite this, there is a significant difference in the distribution of the prescription market between these drugs. In fact, nearly half of the market were written for Prestige, rather than the clinically identical FXOR extended release. And this is an example of evergreening. Prestige itself is a different chemical, but fundamentally it is exactly the same as FXOR extended release, yet it was able to be patented and written off as a protected product and taken a large chunk of the market. When we talk about pharmaceuticals, we need to be mindful that it's always an active ingredient, and this is the primary focus, but that is not always what we are talking about. Sometimes the active ingredient isn't the key issue. It could be that it's a very unstable active ingredient and needs to be housed accordingly. Or, if it's not formulated like that, it could be that the issue is delivery. How do you get this drug to the right place in the right concentrations without having off-target effects? And this will be what allows you to treat the condition. Now, in some cases, we have medication that is extremely effective, but it can't be given at efficacious doses because it would be too toxic to off-target sites, thereby causing unintended harm. It is these other ways of modifying the drugs that are another means of evergreening the patents. Modifying those delivery mechanisms, altering the amount of drug that needs to be present because you can more specifically target a particular site, a way to prevent side effects from off-target effects, ways to package it so that it's more available. These are all perfectly viable and reasonable ways of improving a product after the fact. After all, the first time a drug is brought to market, they may not know about some of the side effects due to the limited size of a clinical trial, but after-market monitoring allows them to identify things that they can work on, or even if they aren't working on those after the fact, they may have been working on them when the first and original drug was patented. This might have been improvements being run in consecutive sequence, or if not concurrently, with the clinical trials to get the first drug patented and approved. This is why the original patent is not necessarily evil or wrong, and in fact, they do have a use in protecting the work and creating a reward for that work. It's how follow-on patents are a way of doing this for future R&D or developments of a more refined product. That is where this gets into a lot of trouble and becomes a controversy. It's particularly how a lot of follow-on patents tend to fail in how they do what they do and how much of a development they really are. Often it can be very difficult to refine a product beyond that first initial discovery, and that first initial discovery was extremely difficult and expensive. This means that the whole approach behind that first patent and the first approval is that the cost for the manufacturer of that drug is that they will have to effectively make all of their research available to the public as part of that patent, but also all the clinical data so that a generic can come along and compare their results of clinical trials with the original and say, we have something that is fundamentally exactly the same. The other risk with patenting a new drug is that if the patent office rejects the application, you will have published your original research with your original invention for the public to see, and this means you run the risk of it becoming a publicly usable prior art invention. That means someone else can come along, take it, and make for follow-on innovation. This means that somebody who's trying to patent a new discovery or a new drug could well have just risked their entire discovery. In fact, this is what you often find. If the original patent is given, it's still available to the public to look at and understand, and this is why most of the follow-on patent applications for a particular invention in the pharmaceutical industry are not filed by the original creator or company, but rather others, more often than not either a competitor or someone who's in a position to be able to take advantage of it. This often leads to a whole bunch of legal challenges. One of these is particularly controversial, and it is the Allergan one. Allergan was able to take its eye drug Retasis, and it gave it to the St. Regis Mohawk tribe in 2017. Their argument was that as a Native American tribe, they held sovereign immunity. This meant that they could not be sued for intellectual property stuff. Since they had sold or given the patent to this tribe, their argument was that because they hold the right to it, nobody can make this drug now except those who have the license from them. This was their attempt to circumvent the patent law. Now, this was a great idea in theory. Unfortunately for them, there is a judiciary in America, and they do their job on occasion. In this case, the Supreme Court rejected their argument. This meant a lower court's decision to not allow them to have this particular deal meant that the intellectual property that they thought they'd been able to sell to this native tribe and then protect was no longer protected and open to the public. The ability to use follow-on development is essential for improved drugs, and the ability to protect it is important to pharmaceutical companies for that reason. Without this, public health medications like insulin would not receive the attention that they do. We would not get better, more refined and specific insulin, as there would be no reason to try and improve upon it. They would lack the incentive. There would be no incentive if they could not be protected and a reward received. It should also not be so extensive and easy that a minor modification to the formulation could and should and often does warrant a new patent. One quote summarizes this situation perfectly. Roger Collier said, "Generic drugs are equivalent to brand name drugs. They have the same medicinal ingredients. A Me Too drug, in some ways, is just as sophisticated as a generic drug. It is just tweaked a bit to claim it as a new invention. Should they get patents?" End quote. Collier is correct to argue this. The nature of some of these new developments is just as good as what a generic company would have to do to make the same equivalent drug. All they have done is take that drug and label it as their own yet again. They also have the home field advantage of often having spent 20 years working on it. This means they have the ability to make modifications more readily and more effectively. The fact that they can do so does not mean they shouldn't, and in some cases, modifications to make and improve drugs of follow-on development should be seen as a new development in its own right, but in many cases it's simply an abuse of what are fundamentally loopholes in the law. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you might have below.